probably not going to go very well. So growing layers of leadership, promoting from within, helping support those careers as they grow. And then from the newly minted service manager's perspective, what's expected of you? How do you kind of grow into that role and really own it? So I've got a couple of amazing panelists with me today to help talk through this topic. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Josh, can I get you to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Josh Mahota with Executech. We're about a 300-person MSP. We've got regions across 7 different areas of the West Coast, essentially 7 different directors of technology or service leaders leading out with various levels of team leads. Um, so that's where I've been the last 7 years. Prior to that, I was with a smaller MSP, 25 people, single service leader. So it's been interesting watching that smaller environment versus what we're going through now and trying to unify our services across 7 different regions and 7 leaders. So excited for the chat.
Thank you for joining today. I know you've been on the road for the last few weeks, so thanks for squeezing this into your schedule as you're trying to catch up on all the things that don't happen when you're traveling. Uh, Kyle, speaking of traveling,
Hey, what's up? What am I traveling? Oh yeah, I'm traveling right now. Totally forgot about that.
your guitars aren't in the background, so it's evident that you were somewhere.
Yeah,
Um,
man, yeah, you know how the road life is.
oh yeah.
It can be a great mistress, but at the t next time you get home and you go, man, I have a lot of paperwork to get to. Because the second you
Yeah,
get in the car to the airport, nothing's getting done.
nothing. Mine is I take notes in Slack to myself, so when I get back, I have a laundry list of things I promised I would follow up on. But Kyle, for those folks who might not know you in the audience, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Kyle Christensen. I'm one of the co-founders at Empath, pretty obvious, the big purple elephant. I started my career in the MSP channel in 2003 with a small little company you might have heard of, Geek Squad. I was part of the integration team when we were trying to figure out what are IT services, how does this relate to businesses versus consumers, and I had to roll it out to 1,200 locations. So a pretty large rollout. From there, I was fortunate enough to be CEO of 2 MSPs. One was a hyperscale MSP, not as big as that 300-person behemoth known as Executech, but we weren't too shabby at 150 employees. I started an MSP consulting firm off of that called Sierra Pacific Group, had about 60 employees, and at the same time, we had about 1,500 MSPs under contract. And I exited that 2022 to start my endeavor with Empath to help MSPs teach and train their team more so than the owners.
I like that tagline. Um, so we're gonna go ahead and put a poll up really quick just to kind of get a level set from the audience on if you currently have a formal service manager role in your organization. So let's start a bit with, I think some definition might be important here of, what does a service manager really mean inside of an organization? What are they responsible for? What are those core pieces that a service manager should expect to own? Josh, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sorry, the poll was up here. So can you repeat the question? It was
No, you're fine. What's a service manager role? Like, what are the key responsibilities that a newly minted service manager might expect to be responsible for?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, mentorship for sure, right? Training techs. I think the primary responsibility is just ensuring service is being delivered up to your standards, right? Making sure tickets are moving forward, making sure that we're getting the CSAT information we need, making sure we're appropriately responding to that, and then coaching the techs and moving the team forward and making sure we're closing tickets, right?
So, in your opinion, is a service manager expected to be the most technical person in the room?
Definitely not. No, I found over the years my most successful tech or service managers have roughly like a high-end tier 1, maybe mid tier 2 level understanding of technology. But really, I'm looking for somebody that understands people. They're passionate about process. They're passionate about accountability and holding their text to delivery, right?
Do you mind if I comment on that, Becky?
No, please.
So I've had a lot of time to think about this. So Todd, Kate, and I have something called Service Manager Cohort, where we meet with about 500 service managers every single month. And if there's one thing we talk a lot about is we try to compare MSPs to manufacturing because it's an interesting way to contextualize it. And we make the saying that service managers manage service. And it's that service component that has to be deconstructed because it's their job in an enterprise to put out a good product. Like Josh mentioned, right? One way to measure that is with your CSAT. So if you think about that, well, what is the product I'm selling or creating, which is ultimately in most MSPs, their labor force. They have engineers that are on a shelf, and that product that's on the shelf needs to be available, it needs to be affordable, and it needs to be desirable because you need to enable the sales team to be able to have product on the shelf when there's someone in line saying, hey, I'd like to buy one of those MSPs. So when I try to think of what a good service manager entails, they are responsible for the product's quality and availability. So there's always going to be so many components that get broke down. And in a lot of cases, and I experienced this at my MSP, and I'd be curious about you, Josh, sometimes being the smartest tech isn't a key KPI. I know that's kind of redundant, a KPI in product quality. A lot of times it's how the service was delivered. It's the soft skills, it's the communication, it's the availability. They don't really as care much about how nerdy you are. They care about, did you do it with a smile?
Yeah. No, I mean, 100% agree with what you're saying. Can they connect with the employees? Right. No offense to the techs out there, but a lot of techs do have that. They don't have that innate ability to connect at that level and, build that relationship with the other, those soft skills, right? To develop that relationship with their techs to allow them to be successful. So yeah, definitely more soft skills than tech skills.
Well, and I also think a bit about like the escalation factor that if you have a tech who either hasn't answered the question that the customer has or has answered it, but not in a way the customer felt seen and heard, the next layer up has to be that much more in tune with the soft skill to be able to de-escalate a situation.
Oh, completely. Like, and that really comes down to availability. They need to feel like what they're receiving is being heard because sometimes I think we put a technical perspective on our clients. We project the perspective that we have. When the customer is in pain, they're in pain. They don't care how technical it is. They don't care how complicated that they need to go and how many layers of escalation there are. All they want to know is, are you aware of the problem? Are you working on it? And do they have a reasonable expectation of when a resolve will happen? Sometimes we give them so much data that now we're leaving the interpretation up to them on the quality when it's up to the service manager's job to ensure that at the end of the day, the customer feels heard more so than is being serviced.
Yeah, I would just wrap around that too. I mean, going back to those CSAT scores, when we do miss on that, which happens occasionally, that we do have somebody that when that negative CSAT review comes in, that person's on the phone within 5-10 minutes, reassuring the client that, hey, we're here, we're gonna make this right. Maybe you didn't have the greatest experience there. I'm gonna dig in, I'm gonna understand it and definitely close the loop. So that's a skill you're gonna need out of that person that, maybe that technical person wasn't done well, right?
Well, and what's funny, Josh, is really when it comes to that question, Becky, of escalations and trying to figure out at what layer things are going to be fixed, a lot of times that is going to be a reactive resolve for an MSP. So the service manager is going to have a very heavy-handed foot in quality assurance, quality checks.
Mm.
They're going to really have to be able to review, did that person do what they needed to be done? And then, like you mentioned, Josh, immediately give them mentorship and feedback of, hey, I know that you can do something that I can't, but you're kind of a dick about it when you did it, when you're calling the customer.
Agreed. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also I mean, we've all been on that call when you've maybe asked to speak to a manager where you didn't feel like your thing was getting resolved. automatically, you know, as the service manager, that call getting forwarded to you, that ticket getting forwarded to you is already coming with some anxiety attached to it. Like nobody asks to speak to the manager, very rarely for positive reasons. There's usually something else at stake there. So knowing that there's, you know, some key responsibilities, it's called some non-negotiables for the role. You know, on our prep call, we talked a little bit about like team performance, client satisfaction, efficiency, definitely, conflict, but then there's mentoring, which we will definitely get to a bit further in the call of mentoring those technicians. So if I had to ask, how does it differ from a lead technician or a director of service? Like, how does a service manager role differ specifically from lead tech or even a director of service?
Ooh, up and down.
You want to
You
start,
want to take
Kyle?
that, Josh?
I'll let you kick off.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you can go ahead and kick off. I'll let you lead out
Okay.
on this one.
So let's start going down. How does a service manager differ than the lead tech? So when I think of ITIL, tier 1, 2, 3, and how things escalate, typically a tier 3 engineer is really concerned with the efficiencies of the service because they may not get as many at scale tickets escalated to them. But so what they need to be starting concerned about is how is the documentation and the technology standards created that allow less tickets to be escalated to them. So they're really going to be focused on de-escalating tickets because that's actually an economy of scale function to where as you grow, my costs go down. So as I break that down, how does then a service manager differ? Well, the service manager needs to make sure that the tier 3 person is actually enabling that economy of scale, that they're actually accountable for that economy of scale, and they're not just being a ticket crusher of, fuck it, I'm just going to have high resolution time of my escalations. It's really, is escalations decreasing over time? I'm going to let you go, Josh, and then we can kind of break down the director side.
Yeah, sure. I also think on the tier three, I mean, obviously the building the processes, but really mentoring those techs, right? I don't expect my tier ones and twos going to my service manager to say, hey, how do I do this technically? Right? Let's learn it from the guys that have been in the trenches that are versed in that space. And let the service manager really drive, like Kyle alluded to earlier, the product, the quality assurance, the metrics, the data. And then on the director side, and then we'll go back to Kyle. So director on my side is typically overseeing more than just the service desk, right? They're overseeing the professional services team. I really expect them working across all departments, right? They're working with your client success managers. They're meant to allow that smooth transition between service handoffs to professional services, accounting, making sure invoicing is right? They're keeping all of those pieces together, where the service guys are really just they're honed in on delivering that product that Kyle mentioned, pulling off the shelf.
Yep. Yeah, so if we think about an enterprise, so an enterprise is structured in a way very similar to military platoons where you don't have anything more than 9 to 15 direct reports. Most research shows 7 to 9 is the sweet spot because our short-term memory can actually only retain 7 bits of information at any one time. So if you think of each person as a bit of information, 7 people is where our brain starts to have a capacity problem, and you got to forget one person to let another person in. So when you have this, there becomes a world, and especially managed service providers, of we aren't just monthly recurring revenue from labor. A lot of us have professional services, which is non-recurring labor. A lot of us have security services, a different form of the recurring revenue, especially if you have a SOC or a true MSSP. And then a lot of MSPs have some type of specialty, like a voice service or a physical security service, especially when they hit certain layers. So when you start to see the director role appear, it's like Josh alluded to, is someone needs to manage all of the managers that are managing all of these service lines. So if you have 4 lines of service, 4 different service products, then you are going to need a separate manager. And at some point, the owner can't manage 7 different service managers. So typically what you see in a director of service or director of operations is a real overview of the total profitability of all the products combined. So you'll see things like gross profitability responsibilities on the P&L, managing cost of goods sold, and making sure your labor of OpEx is actually being controlled or reduced over time, but as a big giant bucket. So it's really just managing the whole rather than the separate components.
So I
And I
like the
actually have a, if you want
differentiation
to, I have
between
a,
it. Yeah.
if we want to get to it, I actually have a org chart I can share if we want to look at it.
Oh, let's do that before we move into mentorship. I think that this is a good spot to talk a bit about, like, because the next poll question is we can get to that in a bit, but we also kind of wanted to talk a bit about like how do you determine who the right people are to promote? So I think looking at an org
Oh.
chart might be a good, like, what exactly do you look for in who to promote into that role? We've talked a lot about the soft skill piece, knowing that that's important. There also, I have to believe, have to be some business acumen in there. Just because you're nice doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily be the right fit for the business.
So when I think back to my MSP, Becky, one of the things that I made it a point to teach all of my employees, no matter who they were, was actually how to read a P&L. Because what I found was if I was to get experienced technical people in my MSP, they were so used to the enterprise sysadmin world where they were more of just a ticket crusher. They weren't the product. They were making sure that the technology was efficient so the employees could make revenue. But in an MSP, it's a different perspective. You are the product. So understanding that, hey, we charge a certain rate to make money, to pay the bills, to make sure you get a paycheck. And what I found was as I started to teach them how to read a P&L and showing them how their timesheets related to the P&L, all of a sudden my timesheet issues went away because they realized if they were to do timesheets or not do them, I couldn't manage my client profitability, which means that maybe I couldn't give them a raise next year or increase the fees that my customers paid or hire my next employee to make sure that they weren't burning out. Completely vanished. I had no reporting on it. So it was really interesting to see this. And one of the things that Todd and I always have to go back to in our service manager peer group is teaching them where the revenues go, where the costs go, and just how to run a business. Because I hate to say it, there's MSP owners that don't even know how to read a P&L, let alone ask them what a balance sheet is.
It was always one of my favorites was the first few quarters of new MSPs into the peer groups was the first couple sets of SLI data and then comparing that against other MSPs and seeing, oh, like it was easier to move those numbers around when it wasn't a standardized set of reporting. And so
Oh,
just
Dipple and I used to go off on this forever back in the day.
oh, Paul,
Oh,
yes,
I miss Paul.
me too. Um, so let's look at this org chart if you've got it
Okay.
pulled up, and let's see what that looks like of kind of what might make sense there as you grow.
Yep. And by the way, there's many
Yeah.
ways to do this. So before I share this, I just want to make sure people don't see this as doctrine. We're so obsessed with best practices in the MSP world that sometimes we take that as you have to do it this way. I'm sure this is different than how Executech is structured. The way I structured this was really around an understanding of how your business is a business. It's not just a service department. And one of the things that I used to use to contextualize this is your business being a funnel. And for that funnel to produce a profit, you have to find work, you have to do work, and then you can get paid. So everything has to be understood that there is a cash flow mechanism. So, and let's see if Zoom's going to let me share this. Sometimes permissions are fun on Apples that you don't use all the time. So can you guys, I don't know if this will pop up with Cody being able to
We
share
can
it.
see it.
Fantastic. So one of the things that you have to kind of start with is understanding how an MSP actually has separate modes to find work, do work, and get paid, right? That funnel. So with that, you have some support departments. You have the revenue, right? The sales team, the people that are owning the revenue that's coming into a business. You have the service department, which can be operations or service. The name doesn't matter, right? They're managing the product. And is that product being delivered at a cost that we expect? That's called gross profitability. And then the finance department, making sure in the back office staff to making sure that everyone gets paid, right? And that could be your procurement team, that could be your accounting team, that could be the owner themselves, or maybe an administration or an office admin. But when we're talking about the service department, and let me get to it, and this is kind of what we were talking about of managing up or managing down with the service manager, the difference between a director and a service manager. And this is just an example, right? I said everyone can be a little different. Is that operations owner? We can call him a director, we can call him a COO, we can call him a VP of a service. They're managing typically gross profitability, total gross profit. And I don't know if Executech differs from this at all, Josh, but ultimately, right, if that quality product is good, can I make sure someone is responsible for all of the different shelves we have of products?
Correct. Yeah, no, and that's essentially what we do with our COO role. Yeah, so that doubling back, I was just thinking about the difference in the director role and the service manager role and how much I expect their financial acumen to be. Really at that service manager role, I love challenging the guys to service gross margins, and being a member of Evolve, HTG, whatever you want to call it, for years, knowing that 50% best in class, challenging them to that metric. The other one really above line for me is just the cost of the tool set, right? Because and that smaller MSP, when you first start to get that service manager, you may have somebody leading the tech, you may have them managing the tools. As we get bigger, right, we certainly have teams specifically around that. And then my directors and above, yeah, I mean it's every aspect of that P&L, above line, below line. You need to understand what EBITDA is, and how they can impact both.
Well, and that's kind of when I built this graphic, Josh. That's why I put the word owner on here rather than manager or director, because ultimately a good service manager, and in most MSPs, this would be a managed service manager in a lot of cases. You own what that product quality is. You should have soup to nuts every ability to influence if that product is good or not good. Is the machine we have to build to produce the first doohickey that creates the entire product, is it the right product? And you mentioned that, Josh, right? Like what's in our stack? I think sometimes we go right for stack because we think of the efficiency side, but we don't think about the opportunity cost that's going to take to roll it out, to replace the old tool, to train everybody on the team. And sometimes new tools in a stack actually become detractors from efficiencies because at the end of the day, if that assembly line's not moving, then I'm not producing product. I'm not making products cheaper at scale, and my customers aren't able to buy it. So how are we stopping our manufacturing plant to replace something in our stack?
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember coming on in my first job, we had 3 different antivirus products out there and 3 different levels of deployment, right? And it took us a year just to get down to one. But by doing so, right, then you see the efficiency gains in the single product, being able to buying power, et cetera, et cetera. And the service manager being able to understand that and how that impacts the finances is amazing.
Yeah, exactly. There has to be a world, and you kind of went to the positive side of it, and sometimes I'm a little too pessimistic when I talk about it, is if before I go ahead and make a change, am I able to conceive, well, how many months is it going to take me to make enough profit from those efficiencies to pay off that change? You could have something so inefficient that sucks, that is literally costing your team a half hour a day per person. That adds up quickly in a couple months, and I can justify a 10, 15, $20,000 migration change.
Absolutely.
So can your managers, because they understand finance, help understand that this migration is a benefit, and here's how you can eventually hit your goals? Now, what's a fun conversation with this, Becky, as well, is when you get to more high-performing teams or more mature teams, and I don't even know if SLI talks about this, and it kind of does, actually, now that I think about it, is all of this layer, all of these services owners in this graph, at some point become actually variably compensated. So they actually have a part of their salaries or their total earnings come from the profitability of the product that they manage and gets put out. So I could make $150,000 a year as a service manager, but 40,000 of that might come from how profitable was the product that you managed.
That you have a different level of ownership of it if there is, I mean, income at risk or ability to be earned, additionally, there's some skin in the game there that's a different perspective than just managing people. And I would believe that would make you be a bit more protective of your time and your
Yeah.
resources on your team.
Well, and that's a good lesson for owners because you have to recognize if you want to get to a place to where you can actually allow someone on your team to manage something as scary as it is as your main product, managed services, the only way for them to truly be accountable is they need the say in order to influence the profitability of that product. And that becomes a vulnerable moment. That becomes a scary moment because what if they fail? Well, they are going to fail. They are going to fuck up. So you have to be okay with them making a mistake so that they can learn, so that they can evolve, and so they have an opportunity to make more money so you as an owner can go focus on the next thing that your business needs to grow.
Yeah, just to stack on that a little bit too. I mean, I've never hired a service manager that came in with a high level of financial acumen, right? So moving them into that variable comp really incentivizes them to start understanding the finances, some pushing them out of their comfort zone, right? I mean, usually they're pretty solid techs, they're pretty good with people. I like to hire ones that are amazing at process and accountability, but the accounting and finance side is not inherently in their vocabulary, and tying it to variable, maybe not 100% on the
Yeah.
finance side, tie it to some service delivery KPIs, but make a percentage of their salary tied to finance, and they tend to learn it pretty quick.
And honestly, what I find too, Josh, and I don't know if you've seen this, is they have a new respect for the business, a new respect for the owner, because they start to understand how critical things like timesheets or overstaffing or asking for the next hire, how taxing that becomes on the business. And it ends up creating actually employee satisfaction when you start to open up the financials, because then all of the smoke and mirrors disappears when the owner comes in there and goes, man, we really need to take care of this client because they're a keystone client and they have a lot of profitability that goes into our profitability mix. Do what it
Yep,
takes to make them happy.
exactly.
And I would imagine that your tolerance for underperformers on your team becomes a lot less. That if that's your bottom line at risk now, um, there's there's more at risk, and you're less likely to allow that to continue. Um,
So I did this exercise for a while where I would have service managers plot all of their employees on a 4-quadrant graph. And in the upper right corner of the graph was A+ performers, and we would call those climbers. They climbed the mountain very fast on the way to success. And on the upper left corner of the graph would be what we would call campers. They were the ones that had really good employee culture, but they weren't really efficient, right? If you went camping with them, they were great because they make a great cocktail, tell a great campfire story. But you know what? They just didn't get anything done. Don't ask them to pack. Don't ask them to put the tent up because it would never happen. But then they had in the bottom right quadrant, we would call them cranks. These were people that, man, they could crush tickets, but they're going to make you feel like shit in the process. No one likes them, and they're the ones with that tribal knowledge that we just keep around because they started with the owner back in the day. They have a lot of bad taste in their mouth from all the growth challenges that have had to happen. And you were reluctant to let them go because, well, they're crushing it. They're super efficient, just low culture. And then on the bottom left corner, that's where they're not great at culture and they're not great at efficiency. And I would call them cavemen, because you always have one or two in every organization where you look over there and you go, why is he still here? Why is she still here? And being able to contextualize with that of, well, what is that mix of employees that you have on a scale of culture to efficiency, so that you understand, how do I get more people into those A players, those mountain climbers that you need on your team, and all of the rest either need to shape up or shape out.
just picturing all the cavemen. We all have that. And we all, like, as soon as you said that, I think every single person on this call envisioned that one guy from your first job that you were like, but why?
Why are you still here? Just flying under radar and no one notices you anymore because you don't make a lot of money. But what's
You
more
make a lot of
important to me
money,
is
but you feel some weird little nuanced thing and you're very
you're the guy that
protective of
takes
it.
out the trash and no one wants to do it.
Mhm.
I will say, though, I think more importantly, every MSP has 2 or 3 cranks, just those tier 3 guys that no one likes, or that one salesperson that hits quota, but they throw everyone under the bus in the process. Those are the ones that usually they need to go first.
Because they could do so much damage. Like, I, ah. So thinking a bit of the formal versus informal training. So there's the given the tool training that you've got to have an expert in the different tool sets that you decide to purchase. But Where else are you finding, Josh, I'm going to come to you for this. Like, where else are you finding good places to train? I mean, you,
Oh
you
man.
mentioned a bit your tier threes, train your ones and twos, but as you keep moving forward, like where else do you go besides a library of leadership books, which have a place, but sometimes aren't the hands-on training people might need?
Yeah, specifically for that service manager role. I mean, we did a number of things. Obviously one is the books around our culture, right? Like we're EOS, reading traction, understanding extreme ownership, right? Those that are going to drive our internal core values. But beyond that, we actually had the privilege of working, oh gosh, what was it called? Oh, C-level before PAX 8 picked him up,
Mhm.
but bringing we got to work directly with Rex before Rex got too big to, be able to work with every client. But we brought
Oh, I can bring
C-level in
Rex in.
for,
He's here right now. I can go
Is
tap him on
he?
the shoulder and hold him
dude,
in.
he's amazing, right? So we worked with him for 8 months, right? Because our service manager came up, he was a tier two tech, go be the service manager. What does that mean? So really wrapping him around a Rex Frank, a coach, you pick your flavor of it. There's a number of them out there. The other one was after we got through that, when Evolve introduced the service executive peer groups, right? Because these guys have nobody to talk to. I mean, within a big organization like Executech, we're blessed that they have each other. But really dumping our service manager in there for the last 2 or 3 years and giving them their own network of people to go to that are having like-minded issues, that was key. So that they're really those two outside your traditional training paths.
I remember the first MSP GeekCon where it was for folks who aren't fortunate to be in peer groups, to have some of that more formalized community. I remember sitting at the bar one night, it wasn't even that late, but just watching this group of service techs look at each other and just realize how seen they were. That, they'd never met anybody just like them. And all of a sudden there was this gaggle of 10 other people that were so much like them and dealing with the same things at work and the same growth constraints or paths and where they go next and how important that sense of community is. I think you've really hit something there that some stuff can be trained internally, but at some point you've got, if you want people to continue to grow, bring in fresh ideas that aren't just top down, but external ideas might really help you skip some growth pains along the way.
And you know what's
Absolutely.
funny about that, Becky, is someone that's building an education company is we always get people in the sales cycle coming to us saying, tell us what Microsoft training you have and tell us what CompTIA training you have. They go right for the hard skill. We streamed over 50,000 minutes of content last month, primarily to service managers, engineers, technical people. And in that, the most popular category of training that we had was soft skills. It was, let's talk about how to make your day better, how to interact with people better, how to make sure you de-escalate tough situations, how to truly have empathy for your customers and for your team members. And it's a funny contrast to what sometimes an MSP owner thinks that their people need to learn because, hey, if I have a better hammer in my toolbox, then I can do my job better. Well, a lot of times what they're seeking is ways to just better enjoy their job, right? To be able to better work with their customers better.
And I have
And
to believe that some of this also comes down to if you were promoted inside of that organization, you are now managing people who do the job you used to do. And so trying to learn that your way isn't always the only way, that people are going to find their own paths
yeah.
and being willing to let people learn. And Kyle, you mentioned earlier, fail fast. Like you have to allow failure. That's how people learn.
Oh, 100. It's one of the, and it's one of those things where, right, we can't teach everything as a platform. So there's some things that we have to at least set an expectation for. So in a lot of the training videos we make, we have a fantastic head of learning at our MSP. He came from Panera and Ring Central. His name's Keith. And a lot of times he spends so much time with our educators that we call navigators on how to set the right expectations in a course from the first lesson. And a lot of times it's the, hey, here's one way to solve this problem. It may not always solve it. And again, we say in MSP, we all love best practices, but best practices only defeat 60% of the problem The other 40%, you have to put your own personality on. You need to conform it to your business. It creates the foundation you can build on top of, but it may end up not being right for your business. And I remember when I was in HTG and really working through a lot of what MSPs were sharing with me didn't work at my MSP. And it had nothing to do that it was a bad way of doing things. We were just growing at a different rate than everybody else. So we had different challenges than the others in our peer group. But being able to at least hear different ways of problems being solved, it creates flexibility for your team. And it's really, if there's one skill that I think makes MSPs go from good to great, to use a Jim Collins term, it's resilience. It's being able to hamper the cortisol effect in the employees, cortisol being the stress hormone of your employees, to know that, hey, sometimes you're not going to have the answer. Let's find a way to solve it together. And if you make a mistake trying to solve it, that's just part of the process to finding success.
Yeah, one thing that came to mind while you were going through that, Kyle, was, the non-traditional learning paths. When you hire that role, finding somebody that's passionate about learning is important, right? I can't tell you how many times my service manager, I wish I had the time to go attend every SLI webinar, Peter Kajawa and those guys coming out of ConnectWise. I don't. My service managers come to me all the time and they're like, hey, I just learned this in this webinar, and can you tell me what the 3x multiple our employees are, right? And that they're coming to me with like stuff they've learned, and I'm just like, I need to watch that webinar. That sounds really, really good.
Well, or
Um,
it creates a sense, and I always feel bad for this. It creates a sense of you're failing sometimes when you focus on like best in class numbers, where like if you just focus on getting 5% better, 10% better, let's celebrate the gains that you have, not the gap that you have to complete. There's a great book called The Gap in the Gain, actually, that kind of goes over this whole idea of don't focus on best in class, because it's going to hamper improvement and make you want to go 100 steps at once, not just 1 or 2 steps at once. So there's a real delicate balance that you have to take with some of those. I mean, what do you want to do? A brand new service manager, tell them you need to go from 0 to 100 tomorrow? You're just setting them up to not be resilient. You're setting them up to fail for the next 5 years as they get to best in class numbers.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
I like that 5%, like a reasonable amount of growth that accounts for the ebbs and flows of business reality, that isn't quite and isn't so black and white as absolute failure or success.
Success is addictive. I don't want to be told I'm failing every single day for the next year.
So I actually asked Paul Dipple that at one point, like, why'd you choose red, yellow, green? Like in the reporting of best in class, why red, yellow, green? He's like, there's actually studies done that like human nature is you want to be green. So if you make it colors that people understand, they live within those realms and they will strive for that. I was like, well, yeah, nobody wants to be yellow. He's like, exactly. I was like, okay, that like it, but it makes sense. So, but if you tell somebody that they have to be green tomorrow, it's not doable, and you're just setting somebody up to feel like they're failing right out of the gate.
Not a great way to
So,
develop your culture.
no, not at all. So, Josh, thinking of your transition, your growth here, where are the places that you've gone? So we've talked, you joined Evolve. Are there other areas that you found success, with mentorship, with growth, or have you just kind of created a community of that with your peers?
I mean, specifically within Executech, we just started to create it. I mean, it's hard to send 7 directors of technology to 7 unique peer groups, right? So there was just a number of us that had participated in those, and so we've started to just bring those groups together internally. We call them brain trusts, right? We definitely don't follow the SLI model per se within those peer groups, but we do meet regularly once a week and we talk about, what's working there, what's working here. We have an aligned set of KPIs. And so if somebody's always green in that KPI and somebody's red, well, what are you doing? Right. So creating that internal group, we're trying to do that with our other groups as well. Yeah, and then ironically enough, we're just we're probably way behind, but trying to get that true learning management system together and actually just meeting Kyle today, we're going to have a chat afterwards because we're just getting ours kicked off the ground. And so knowing that there's one specifically purpose built for MSPs is exciting. But yeah, it's been a struggle, right? I mean, we've gone different directions from we're going to be completely autonomous to one company, and now we're on this one executech path. So we're working through it, and we'll figure that out.
Oh, that's great. I mean, by reference of your size, your locations, you do have some different challenges than a single location, less employee MSP. I think that sometimes just because you're bigger doesn't make it easier. It just means there's more areas to keep an eye on, more things to pay attention to. Um, so team morale and retention, you know, we know that strong leaders help keep teams. What's the saying? Like people don't leave companies, they leave bad management. I was like, yeah, that's it. Okay, see, I pulled that one out of my head. I did not have that on my notes. Um, you know, where do you see a service manager's responsibility in that team morale? And have you seen any creative ways that you've seen service managers own that with their teams?
Yes, I kicked that one off. I mean, the single biggest tool, in my opinion, is that maybe not weekly, but every other week, one-on-one, right? Having that defined, making it sacred, making it holy. I've done that throughout my career, and I tell everybody that this one-on-one is meant. I should never be surprised when you come in and give me your notice, right? That means I failed you as a one-on-one. So we need to be open, we need to be honest, we need to build that relationship and trust. So that's always been a huge important tool for me. Yeah, what do you got, Kyle?
So Becky, I love that quote. People leave bad managers, not great companies. And to unpack that, well, what creates a great company? Typically, a great company has clear directions that everybody is aware of, that everybody knows how they can contribute to. So, hey, I got a guest over here.
Hunches friends.
Hi,
The
Wes.
great Wes Spencer. So if I think about, okay, if a great company is where we're going, then the manager has to be able to communicate with their team how they contribute to where the company needs to go. And it needs to feel real. It can't just be we're trying to build a great company with great culture. It's too vague. It's impossible to manage. So I think great company or bad companies fail decent managers at some points too. But as you unpack that, you go to the next layer. Well, like you mentioned, Josh, one-on-ones and actually speaking to your employees becomes large because how else can I drive accountability with my employees if I can't show them how they contribute to a goal to then motivate them to pick up their heels, to learn more, to achieve more, to talk better with their customers? You're creating an environment where they just don't care. And what I found was interesting, Becky, and I don't have my accountability bat. I probably should have brought it to the event, is where I have baseball bat with accountability engraved on it. If you guys haven't seen it, I give like 5 out every year. Is even at my MSP and all the Best Buy stores that I had to turn around in the 2000s, accountability improves culture. And why that is, and I know that's hard to understand at times, is it's the ability to communicate fairness and that what you expect is what you will inspect. And it's going to be fair to everybody because there's nothing worse, nothing than when you have 4 people on your help desk, 3 of them are killing themselves to get their tickets done. They are working so hard. They are there till 5:15. And there is one tier 1 guy that clocks out at 4:30 and closed 2 tickets that entire day. What you are communicating to that entire team is that your words don't matter, your expectations don't matter. And that's going to be more demoralizing for your team than anything. And this is where sometimes being always the fun manager ends up biting a lot of managers in the butt. And sometimes the managers that are fair and fun, but also not afraid to have a difficult conversation, will create a team that is driven. And what's actually great about this is I think it's MIT has research that has shown that if goals are a little tough, a little outside of attainable, you will actually have higher motivation than employees that just have easy checkbox goals. And you can only do that by talking and having those one-on-ones.
Agreed. One of my favorite quotes is, in regards to accountability, is just feedback is a gift, right? And all of us want to hear it. We want to hear the good. We want to hear the bad. If you don't want to hear the bad, then you just don't need to be on my team. Goodbye, right? Because you want to get better. So we definitely preach feedback is a gift. And then just one of the cool exercises one of my service managers just did to help build morale is we all end up going to these quarterly meetings, right? The service managers there, the CSMs are there, but what issues get bubbled up? My service manager actually pulled all the techs in, told all the leadership to step out, had one scribe go, and the service team got to actually brain dump everything they would like to see fixed without leadership in the room. And then that was the list he brought to the leadership team and said, this is what's important to our team, not what I'm interpreting is important to the team. So I think that helped build morale, and it was a cool exercise. We ended up going a different direction that quarter than I thought we were going to go. So
people
like
like to
that.
have input on
Yes.
decisions. Even if it
Yep.
doesn't go their way, they like to be heard.
And with that, we are sadly at time. This happens every time. I think I look at, we're at like the halfway mark and I'm like, ooh, do I have enough in my outline? And then we hit this part. It's like time speeds up. So, I mean, some amazing takeaways. Kyle, that 7 to 9 number of how many pieces of information, how many people someone can manage, I think is really critical. To those of you wondering, when should I be looking at this? And then Josh, that finding a network, like finding a tribe of like-minded or people in similar boats to help you grow, bringing in that outside expertise, be it a peer group or somewhere, I think is really, really critical. And I love your idea too of those open sessions of feedback. I think that's a really cool takeaway of creating an environment where that is people will work towards the goal they help develop. I think that's really important. So thank you both so much for your time today. For those of you wondering, next week is it's kind of a big deal. It's our Product Lab webinar. It's another one of our monthly series. And next week's Product Lab is going to be delivered by 2 of our founders live. It's down there right now to register. It's going to be delivered with them live at our company summits. You'll see all of us sitting in the room watching this delivered live. It's the first time we've done it. It could be awesome. It might be chaos. We will find out together, but please come join us for the product lab. And Kyle, thanks for sharing your LinkedIn there. Josh, thank you so much for your time and bringing your vast amounts of knowledge as you've grown in this space. Kyle, as always, lovely to see you. Thank you. And we'll see you all next month for another Fireside Chat.